What happens when you purify your body, your mind, your spirit? Something miraculous. The body begins to heal itself. Welcome to the Medicine Girl podcast, where each week we explore new ways to heal your body from the root, igniting your inner healer. You are the medicine. And now, here's your host, Stebbins.
Hello and welcome to the Medicine Girl podcast. It is me, your host, Stebbins, and today I am excited to have Jim Stephenson Jr. with me today, who I consider to be the absolute expert on vitamin D3 now. And I think probably, Jim, when you and I were waking up a few years ago, I doubt we decided we'd become so interested in vitamin D3. But I want to just introduce your bio so that people know why you're so interested in vitamin D3 and why I'm so interested in vitamin D3. But you come from a fisheries background, and you started researching vitamin D3 because of a family member had health issues, severe osteoporosis at the age of 51. So we can say, that is way too young to be having any kind of bone issues. And she was prescribed 50,000 international units, that's IU, of vitamin D, which caused her to decline and get even worse. So that gave you that skin in the game and the incentive to start researching it. And then lo and behold, what do we find? All of these nefarious, I think, causes of supplementing people with vitamin D3, or just blanket, hey, you're low in vitamin D3, you need to take this supplement. And it's usually, I think the general consensus is not just supplementing with vitamin D3, but mega dosing with vitamin D3, especially after 2020, when everyone was hot on this idea that people were getting COVID. And this was supposed to be the alternative community's solution to fighting COVID. And so now, don't take the injections, but take mega doses of vitamin D3. So welcome to the Medicine Girl podcast, Jim Stephenson Jr.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm just going to quickly share just a little bit about why I'm so passionate about this. My son is now 16 years old. When he was 13, this was right at the beginning onset of 2020, I decided to take him out of school and homeschool him. And so we were doing all sorts of enrichment activities. One of them was going to the skate park. And he fell maybe 5 feet and had a severe shoulder break. And somebody had asked me, I was going all over the place trying to figure out solutions and the best course of action. And somebody asked me if I was supplementing him with vitamin D. And I said, proudly, you bet I am. Vitamin D3, the good stuff, in lanolin with K2, recommended by these functional medicine doctors. And they said, you might want to research it further, because that might be why he broke his shoulder from such a short fall. And kind of like you, as I started to uncover it, your Facebook group was one of the first places I landed, fortunately, because it's the best information, I think, out there. And what I realized is that I was not only contributing to that fracture, but I was giving my son rat poison. I was giving him cholecalciferol, which kills rodents. What struck me the most was that I didn't do my own research. That's on me. And I trusted the alternative community.
Right.
So that is now why I am so intent on spreading the word. The second thing is I'm a home health nurse, and I do hospice and home health. 100% of my patients are on a vitamin D3 supplement. And 100% of them are deficient in vitamin D3 when they do the labs.
Right.
That should cause us to raise eyebrows anyway. Normally things should be on a bell curve, you know. There should be the outliers that are deficient, there should be the ones that are maybe have an excess, and then the ones that are normal. But how, you know, when we look at these lab values, what exactly are we testing for, and what does it mean when they say you're deficient in vitamin D3?
Okay. So they're testing for the 25 hydroxy vitamin D. What D3 becomes as it passes through the liver. It becomes that and stays in the liver, but some of it's released. And so when it's released into the blood, that is what they're measuring, the 25 OHD3. And in my research, I found multiple forms of 25D, and we test a couple of them, at best 3, and I found 15 different forms. And some of the forms start to be dominant in people's blood when they're sick. And those are the ones they're not measuring. So when you have somebody that seems low in 25D, they could either be sequestering it to protect themselves or making another form of 25D that we're not measuring.
Okay.
And that's the case in children. That's definitely the case in children. They turn a lot of supplemental D3 into the epimerization pathway, which is epi 25 OHD3. And only the very best tests pick that up.
And so when it's, to me, and everything that I've researched so far has told me that we don't really know what that means specifically, if they're low, if they're high. It's almost like it's a snapshot of a wave in that moment. And so if you're sick, then that's the other thing. Are you sick releasing toxins and poisons out of your body through secretions? What is illness? What is the root cause of that illness that's causing these lab values to fluctuate for the 25D and the 125D, or is it just different ones that we don't at all test for?
Well, the 25D does fluctuate because what'll end up happening, it has a seasonal variation, first of all. So anytime you're measuring it, you're going to have to take that into consideration. When you're coming out of the winter, you're going to be at your lowest point with the 25D. And in the, at the mid to end of summer, you're going to be at your highest level. It's going to wax and wane, but you're going to store quite a bit of it. But what ends up happening is certain microbes and pathogens have the ability to block the action of vitamin D. That's why they're still around and bothering us. And so Epstein-Barre is a good example. It makes several antigens that are just the right shape to steal a vitamin D receptor. But Epstein-Barre, having an episode of Epstein-Barre in your body will cause you to create a lot of 125D, but it won't be able to get to its receptor. And after a while, the body will start to figure this out, and it will decide to sequester the 25D to prevent it from overrunning and becoming 125D higher than the body wants, because it's not serving its purpose. It's not able to create macrophages and T cells without getting to the vitamin D receptor. So it gets sequestered, much like iron anemia of chronic illness. A lot of pathogens use iron against you. It gets sequestered from serum. It's a false anemia. This is a false deficiency. Plus, any of those infections, they cause a reaction in these molecules we're talking about. The 25D and its carrier protein, vitamin D binding protein, are negative acute phase reactants.
I want to know is, when we're looking at these pathogens like Epstein-Barre, this is, we're all exposed to that on the daily. Most of people have these in them anyway. So, it would be hard to ask this question, or answer this question rather, but is there any kind of correlation between people that are, say, high in the pathogens, or Epstein-Barre, or, all of these things, something's out of whack? Is it they've caught a virus, they caught a pathogen or something. Maybe they were toxified or poisoned in some way.
It could be any of those things. A lot of people would have a flare of Epstein-Barr because they have some other situation in their body. Maybe they have insulin resistance. Maybe they have diabetes. Maybe they have TB. Maybe they have cancer. There's so many different afflictions in all of us anymore. It's unreal how many multiple autoimmune diseases each person can get diagnosed with. It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. And I think, we tend to want to blame an invader. When we look at the climate that we're in right now, there's herbicides, pesticides, rodenticides, glyphosates, everything, all of that's going into our food supply. The United States is one of the worst offenders of allowing these chemicals, and the FDA allows all of them. We have the most, I think, chemicals allowed in our food supply. And then you add into that the stressful lifestyle that we're all leading. Now we're going to add in millimeter wave radiation and everything. So before we get too much down that whole rabbit hole, how did this get started to begin with, that we thought we needed to test for vitamin D, which is actually not a vitamin, in the first place?
Okay. As far as the real drive with testing, what was going on, I'd say probably in 80s and beyond, once they discovered the 25D and they created the test, took a long time to really stabilize the test. And there's a bunch of different kinds of tests too. And so once they were able to start testing the masses, they started to create the data sets, and they started to look at the lab results based upon conditions, diseases, types of cancer. And what they started to see was that the sick people had lower 25D, which makes sense because once they had a comorbid condition, the negative acute phase reactant nature of the molecule had dropped. But what they ended up doing was they took everyone's labs, and they said, with all these people with these conditions that have lower 25D would just have the 25D of the healthy people, they wouldn't have their condition. They immediately went to correlation equals causation. So these healthy people, cancer-free, have a level of 50, let's say, and the sick people have a level of 20, let's say. So they just said, if only you would get your level up to, but it's really more a statement of if you would have had that level, because those people aren't able to then get to 50, but even if they were, intervention doesn't work and cure cancer, doesn't cure diabetes, doesn't cure all those things they're associating it with and calling that level the cause of. Never does intervention cure those conditions.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, if I'm sick, and that can mean a host of different things. Either, let's say, I've gone and I just got back from Mexico and I was partying and drinking and doing all sorts of things. I'm going to be exhibiting symptoms versus, cancers versus Epstein-Barr has gone out of whack. But who knows? But that's going to be my marker saying, okay, something's going on in the body that's in a disharmony, a disease state. We don't know what the root of it is, but we're going to look at these markers and we're going to see, oh, this is low in those exhibiting symptoms. So if it was high, this is their thought process. If we give them something to get it to a high level, they won't be sick like the people that aren't sick with a high level.
Right.
Okay, so which to me sounds like exactly the same game the pharmaceutical industry does with everything. They get a lab value that they can manipulate with a drug or a hormone like cholesterol. They can test for LDL, HDL, triglycerides, and they can say, okay, your LDL is low or high, your HDL is low, and you give us the drug, we can now tell you it's now in a normal range. But to me, I smell a rat.
Right.
Because now I can manipulate you by taking a drug that I'm selling for profit, whether it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your health at all, especially now we know, well, it's still not in mainstream media, but most people know that they've manipulated the whole cholesterol game. Does that sound similar to you, what they're doing with vitamin D3?
Yeah, it does. And health in general. They want to focus on cholesterol, but they have a lot of drugs that probably are impacting your lipid panel. Taking vitamin D negatively impacts your lipid panel because oral vitamin D is shuttled by LDL cholesterol. So you're going to force your body to have more of it available to do this. And then they're going to say, oh, wow, your cholesterol's so high. We got to throttle that back with some statins. And then all of a sudden they're throttling back your healing. That's what happens when they throttle back cholesterol, is they throttle back your ability to shuttle things around to do healing.
And not only that, I think chronic use of statins, what I've seen in my patients, I've been in healthcare 35 years. What I've seen in my patients that are on, and again, they're all 100% are on a statin, is that they start developing more and more signs of dementia and early Alzheimer's from this chronic reduction of cholesterol. So it's the chicken or the egg. We don't know why you're high in cholesterol, and is that even a bad thing?
Right.
That's the thing. And when we're looking at, the 25D, is it even a bad thing? It's a marker of saying something is out of balance. Not necessarily, but the interventions then is drug it back up to the level that the research is telling us we should drug it to.
Right.
Okay, so I want to just do a quick intermission saying that if anyone really wants to go into the pathophysiology of what Jim's talking about, it's not as confusing as it sounds when you first hear it. I've spent 3 or 4 podcasts listening to him over and over and over that you did to try and grasp it, because we're so programmed to think symptom pill, now you're fine. Or if you're in more the health freedom community, it's like symptom supplement. Or that, to me, Jim, is the paradigm that we're under. You're expressing a symptom, and instead of allowing the body to do its own natural mechanisms, we want to drug it and interfere with it. And then that, to me, seems to have disastrous consequences.
Yeah, it at best it's going to be a patch, and then it stops you looking for your real solution and your real problem. And that's the worst thing about vitamin D, because they blame low 25D for things that vitamin D isn't even involved with. A symptom of sweating from the forehead is a perfect example. Find me a paper where the level of vitamin D in your body allows you to not sweat. Sweat is a good thing. I don't understand even how they've packaged some of this. It's just not even believable anymore. But the atmosphere is only open to do that with vitamin D. You don't get to do that with other molecules, especially ones you worked hard to discover that you're truly lacking. Say you don't have very good gut health. Vitamin K is going to be an issue for you. Nobody's building all these scary graphs about how low vitamin K is the cause of so much illness and cancer. Although you could go ahead and make an association, because we know so many people are low in that. It would be really easy to make that work in a correlation equals causation world if you get somebody else to peer review it and help you publish it.
Can we talk a little bit about that, the peer-reviewed and published part of it? Because when I've gone to functional medicine doctors or homeopaths, naturopaths with this information, I feel like I should wear body armor because they feel like they would kill me if they could. And I don't understand why there is so much anger and fear around becoming more open and honest about the research about vitamin D3. It's like they're clinging to the idea that you have to take something to get into good health. So how can they, I guess the question is, how can they get in and manipulate a peer-reviewed article? Because that seems like it's the gold standard. Anyone that wants to present something as their evidence. It's a peer-reviewed article from, and then, you know, choose the British Journal of Medicine or whatever one they hold in esteem. How can they come up with these papers saying, you know, not just supplementing with vitamin D3 is good, but mega dosing?
So the way they're able to do that, first off, you have to get square in your mind that you've got two different camps of people that are going to be in a study that are, you're either looking at their vitamin D levels or you're going to have an intervention and you're giving them vitamin D. So you're going to be focused on their 25D level always. That's always going to be what you're focused on. So keep in mind, people that don't have a comorbid condition are already going to have higher 25D. So they're going to do better. They're going to credit their 25D with their doing better. But they drive home the self-fulfilling prophecy in the intervention studies, because they'll enter that and say you've got your people at 18 or 20. That's the negative acute phase reactant going on. Their 25D is low because it's being sequestered. So no matter how much vitamin D you're going to give them, they're probably not going to raise it because their body is intentionally keeping it low. Then you have the other camp without comorbid, and their 25D is going to go up. They were going to do better whether you intervened with vitamin D with them or not. But now they do better and they took vitamin D. This other group took vitamin D, their level didn't go higher, and they did poorly. So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But those people's body is actually sequestering it and holding it down intentionally to avoid runaway 125D. They already are in a hypervitaminosis state. They're not deficient, they're high in vitamin D, but we're not looking at the right molecule.
Okay, so we're testing for 25D. We should, okay, what test for any of these vitamin Ds would be significant for our health and wellness?
I think it's beneficial to test 25D, mostly because you want to make sure that you don't have any kind of defects in creating 25D to begin with. You want to make sure it's not high. If it's low, you're going to almost immediately want to see what's going on with your 125D. You're going to need to figure out if it's sequestered or not. Most of the time, if you have some comorbid condition, you're sickly or you're ill at this time, your 25D is going to be lower. Your 125D is going to be elevated. It may still be in range. It's going to be normal at a minimum. It's going to be higher in the range. It might be above the range. So that's why you need to check that. But you also want to make sure you don't have a defect with the liver creating that form too, because that deficiency, a deficiency in 125D is an issue and is a big deal. And you would need to take 125D since you can't make it in your body. That's a true deficiency.
How common is that?
Not that common. I recently gathered 250 people's both numbers, 25 and 125D. Two of them, out of all of them, were low in 125D. The vast majority of them labeled low in 25D. One of them, their 125D was point something. That's chronic kidney disease in that person's case. The other person had hypoparathyroidism, which is another defect causing low 125D.
Okay, so I can see how it's a perfect game for the pharmaceutical industry or the supplement industry, or if you're selling, like a lot of these doctors, functional medicine, they sell their private label vitamin D. So then you can say, look, you're sick. But that, to me, right there is stop. Why are you sick? What are these symptoms? Like you said, with kidney disease, what led up to this kidney disease? And we don't want to just all of a sudden dump more vitamin D on it without knowing the causation of that disease state.
Right.
And so then we're just taking a snapshot of somebody that's experiencing symptoms of some sort, and then saying, okay, if you were high in vitamin D, then you wouldn't be experiencing these symptoms. But that doesn't sound like that's true.
No, it's not, because they're talking about the storage molecule that has no biological activity, when in fact, the vast majority of those people have perfectly normal or elevated or high levels of 125D. So the molecule that does the work is already present in there.
Okay. That's it's starting to make a lot more sense as to I was getting lost in okay, what exactly is the reason that we would even test for it and what is it saying? And so it is beneficial if there's something seriously wrong with the way your body's processing.
Right.
And, and as we're just learning more, I think what I've seen in my life is that the body is so miraculous in its ability to heal itself that when we get there and interfere with it, we're creating more problems than solutions.
Right.
So that gets me to the next question. When all these people are taking vitamin D3, what exactly are they taking?
The D3 molecule, whether it's regardless of how it's made, whether you go in the sun or they're making a lab creation that's going to pill, it's said to be identical. It's all the D3 is supposed to be identical. Where the difference exists that matters is in what shuttles that D3. So when you go in the sun and you make D3 in your skin, it's shuttled with the vitamin D binding protein. And it doesn't even necessarily need to go into your blood. It may stay in the skin, stay there, do its job. It may go into other pathways. It isn't necessarily bound to go into the blood. A certain amount of it will progress into the blood and make its way through you. But when you take the pills, fat solubles are picked up in the gut with the lymphatic system. So the shuttle for the D3 that you take orally on the first journey to the liver is going to be with LDL cholesterol. And so you're already, there's your influence to your lipid panel right there. You need LDL to shuttle it. But also, when you go in the sun and you make the D3, you're making it out of 7-dehydrocholesterol. That's what the vast majority of cholesterol is made from. So if you're not making your D3, you leave 7-dehydrocholesterol, pool substrate available to progress to cholesterol. That's another impact to your lipid panel.
Would taking vitamin D3 then cause your cholesterol levels to be out of whack so that they would say, oh, yeah, you definitely need a statin or to increase the statin?
Actually, yeah, it absolutely could. That's what it does. It negatively impacts the lipid panel. And then all of a sudden, by your needing the LDL to be a shuttle, you're going to get labeled cholesterol trouble and you're going to get on a statin. And there's a paper by David Grimes, and he says statin molecules are just vitamin D molecules. And he mentions there's a lot of different statins. Okay. Each statin has a different affinity or attraction to vitamin D receptors, thyroid receptors, and he has a paper that talks about that. So again, excess 125D steals other systems, so do statins.
So if, let's say, somebody's prescribed a statin for the first time, could that show up as a low vitamin D level when they do labs for vitamin D?
I haven't really chatted with that many people that have taken statins. I've just read the literature on it. But I can tell you, recently, my mother was told that she was having mini strokes and her cholesterol was great. And they said, you need to be on a statin to prevent these mini strokes. So she got on that. Keep in mind, she had a scan of her heart. She knew she didn't have any plaques in her heart. She took the statin as they suggested, and it messed up her cholesterol numbers. And they said, that's what happens if you don't need it. And my mother actually had a heart attack, and they looked in there and she had built plaque, and they had to go in there and remove it. So and who's deciding whether you need a statin or not? It should be the body that decides. And that doesn't mean you need a statin. Your body decides it has a problem and tries to deal with it in some way. But again, here comes the Band-Aid. Somebody created these statins, profitable drugs, and we're going to fix you up right now with this.
Yeah, and I think that's I'm kind of starting to connect the dots because I in my 35 years have believed that the pharmaceutical industry doesn't put anything in a pill form or injection that doesn't create downstream customers or doesn't create more harm than good. But you've got to have, they've got to have their boxes to check. It has to be able to change a lab value that they tell you is dangerous. So they tell you LDL is bad. They tell you HDL is good. They tell you all of these things. So get rid of the LDL and take a statin. Well, I think there's been a lot of longitudinal studies that I've read myself that say the higher your cholesterol is, the longer you live without dementia and Alzheimer's. And, most countries don't take the statins that we take here. And they have very low incidences of dementia and Alzheimer's. I think United States now is leading the way in dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yep.
There we go. So and D3 is now part of that because it is one of these. It's not a vitamin. So let's explain what vitamin D3 is. It's a corticosteroid hormone. What is that?
You could get away with calling D3 the vitamin level at that very beginning before your body alters it.
Okay.
But that there's not a metabolite that it's going to make later that isn't a corticosteroid hormone. So it's going to enter that world no matter what you want to call D3. That name game just gets you into tracks that are wandering. It really doesn't matter. But the 25D and the 125D are corticosteroid hormones. So are the plethora of other molecules that we don't talk about. There's higher level molecules than 125D. 125D is what we would call dihydroxy, 2-level, maybe you could call it. It's gone through 2 hydroxylations. There's other pathways where there's trihydroxys, number 1, so you have a higher level molecule. But also, if you step back to the 25 level, the 20-OH-D3 molecule in another pathway is an active molecule after 1 hydroxylation, and it's a substrate to make other molecules that are also active. So it becomes active in other pathways at a lower level.
Okay, and so these hydroxylations occurring in the liver?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. Or different tissue. It depends on which enzyme they're using. It turns out there's a ton of different enzymes that can activate vitamin D. I think there's 5 different ones that can move D3 to 25D. 4 of them, I think, work inside the mitochondria. I think the other one's outside the mitochondria. And then you have to look at which tissues express those enzymes, those CYP enzymes. It's pretty complex, actually.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like when we're talking about this, what I'm seeing is like we're taking a snapshot in this moment of what the body is doing because it's needing to do it in a certain way because of whatever the demands on the body are, and whatever we've been exposed to and our level of activity and all of the pillars of health and wellness and the opposite side. So this vitamin D3, this cholecalciferol, what I started researching initially was that it is a rodenticide. It kills rats. And the way it kills rats, I saw was that as the rat ingests the cholecalciferol or vitamin D3, it pulls calcium from wherever it can, usually the bones and joints and teeth, into the bloodstream, causing heart arrhythmias, causing heart attack in the rat so that it dies. Is that how it dies?
Yeah, it ends up with stones in the liver, kidneys. Just pulls so much calcium that it just ends up with the stones of it.
Is there any benefit to giving this to a human?
It's the same biological act. It's just not acutely fatal. That's, people say the dose makes the poison, and that's very true. So you can have something chronically lethal or acutely lethal. And either way, the biological act is the same. You're going to end up with osteoporosis from pulling the calcium from the bone. And even if you didn't, let's say you didn't get osteoporosis, you had enough calcium in your gut at the time, you're going to end up calcifying because you can't have that much stuff running around in your serum. It's going to calcify the soft tissues. And vitamin K is going to help, because we know that's what vitamin K does. But people seem to think it's magically mated with the D coming in. Again, let's get back to what's going to pick them up. They're both fat solubles. They're both going to go in the gut. They're both going to need LDL to cholesterol to shuttle them. So they could end up stored in fat along the way. Vitamin K protects you down the road. It can't protect you from needing the calcium out of the bone because it doesn't create calcium out of thin air. It handles it once it's in the bloodstream, trying to prevent it from going in the wrong places. Completely different type of protection.
Yeah. And that was my conclusion too, after reading, can you poison the body back to health? Because, and I was actually looking for a reason that would have been beneficial that I gave my son rat poison. Because I was thinking, okay, there's got to be some reason that everyone's telling you to take vitamin D3. And I couldn't find anything. And in fact, I discovered, what you're saying, it pulls that calcium out. So what we're doing is we're thinking we're doing it for our bone health, but it's pulling the calcium, creating the bone density loss. And then you don't want excess calcium in your bloodstream. In nursing school, that's what we learned. It's a delicate, very delicate balance. This calcium and potassium, you got to be extremely cautious. And then that excess then can lead to kidney stones. It can damage the kidneys, the glomerular capsules. That's how, what filters all the urine as it going down the ureters into the bladder. All of those things can be damaged. And so the question I always get from people though is, why do I feel so good initially when I'm taking vitamin D3?
Well, it depends on what initially that time frame. If it's not on the order of a week or longer, that's in your mind. And it could be placebo driven from your mind. You could have a real biological act going on in your body, but it's not because the vitamin D already made its way to the active form and is doing something. It's you really did something magical with your belief. And we see this in the placebo arm of chemo trials. I mention this all the time. If the people that are getting the placebo are expecting their hair to fall out because that's what chemo does to you. So 60 to 65% of them create the biological act of causing their hair to fall out without any drug there to make it happen.
Yeah, and they've done, there's some really great research on the placebo and the nocebo, things that can lead to that belief. But I get a lot of flack from people, and I used to live in Bellingham, Washington. And I know that depression is real when it's dark, 6, 7, 8 months out of the year. And so this is what they say is their black swan or their ace in the hole. It's like people in the northern climates do not get enough sunshine. And now when they're spraying the chemtrails, and this depression is real. And when these doctors are supplementing their patients with vitamin D3, they said they're looking at miracles happening. They go from being depressed and low in vitamin D to waking up and experiencing health and vitality and wellness for the first time.
Well, a lot of those things are really hard to measure. There's not a lab. There's not your depression. There are certain tests they can do and they can assess depression and things like that, but they're not biological markers that you can look at. People can feel better, but sometimes that's just an attitude. It isn't necessarily a biological thing going on. And with the depression, the sad lights and all that, if sad lights work for people, and if you look at what a sad light is, it's full spectrum. It doesn't have UVA or UVB in it. It does not make vitamin D, but they have associated low 25D with seasonal affective disorder. But there's no markers here to point to. As far as when they take the D3, did it progress to 125D and do something biological that reduced their depression, or did they just increase their 25D number? Because that's what they consider proof, increasing your 25D.
I think that's more. Is there any correlation, or if you take a steroid, Because I know, that's the first order of business when you take your pet to the vet if they're sick. It's steroids and antibiotics. And initially there's that bloom. And what I've noticed with the steroids is, yeah, they get better initially, but then it's a cascade of downstream, worsening of, and it's almost potentiating their original
Right.
negative symptoms.
Yeah, Marshall has some work on the excess 25D occupying the vitamin D receptors being like a prednisone effect for the body, a steroid effect. And I could find that article for you and send it to you.
Yeah, I'd like to see that, because I think that would say, okay, this is why people are feeling better initially. The first couple, 3 days, maybe the first week. It's that bloom of like, whoa, I'm on steroids and my body's now masked all the symptoms that, I had originally been suffering from. So what is it that people then in these northern climates, are they at risk for all these diseases because they're not getting enough sunshine, or people that have really dark skin?
The dark skin isn't really a factor when you really start looking at those people's, because we're looking at 25D to allege that.
Yeah.
So when you really look at their 25D, there's other differences in the vitamin D binding protein, in SNPs and the genetic variations in that. Even though dark skinned people typically have lower 25D, they actually have better bone health. They are a lot of times compromised in their access to medical care, and that results in other health issues for them. It isn't the vitamin D per se. They don't have bone health issues in their darker skinned people typically.
I see. So again, it sounds to me like, tell me where I'm wrong, that we have just associated this marker on a lab of low 25D with all of these symptoms.
Right.
But osteoporosis, bone density loss, multiple sclerosis. I've read all sorts of things associating low vitamin D levels with disease processes.
Right. You could do that with any molecule, but you wouldn't get it published, especially molecules that aren't fortified in for us, that we're going out and trying to find in our diet, add to our diet. Like the vitamin K, you want to get your gut healthy so it makes your vitamin K, so you could make all kinds of papers about low magnesium, low E, any number of things that you're working hard to get into your diet. We could blame, but again, they're not going to let you blame another molecule. They've really got the spotlight on vitamin D. It's like a religion now. That's where you're supposed to go. It'll stop you from finding your real problem, and you'll just focus on that, and you'll obsess on raising your 25D.
Exactly right. And that is, I think, to me, everything that sums up the pharmaceutical game.
Right.
Blame your toxic lifestyle that will exhibit symptoms on, bad luck or dark skin or living in the north or not getting enough sunlight. And, I know people use a lot of sunscreen now. So is it possible to actually be deficient if you don't, let's say you're living, way up there in Barrows, Alaska, or, Siberia? How do they get enough? I guess it's almost like we need to photosynthesize somehow with the sun.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of it that you'll make in the sun. What's really odd though is that in these places where there's low sun, the food sources tend to be pretty packed with it. Like the Inuit, what they eat. You and I couldn't eat that. We couldn't eat blubber. That we couldn't eat salmon roe, very much of it anyway. These things that they have in their diet are really, really packed with vitamin D. But I always want to say this, there's a possibility that we are low in vitamin D molecules no one's talking about and nobody's measuring. And that's why, because nobody's talking about and nobody's measuring them. So if you're not getting reasonable sun on a regular basis, that's how you charge those other molecules. It's really important to understand that Vitamin D3 is made because it's a photoliable product, and the sun creates that from the 7-dehydrocholesterol. It continues to progress to other molecules. It becomes two really important ones, tachysterol and lumisterol, T3 and D3, not T3 like for the thyroid. Well, those molecules have their own pathways. They can revert back to D3 as a pressure valve without sun for 72 hours. But they make a ton of other molecules that we actually could be low in, but nobody's checking. And one of the reasons they're not checking is because anything that didn't play in the calcium world was abandoned as inert. They said vitamin D is about calcium. Nobody's taking it to up their calcium. Very few people are taking it up their calcium. They're taking it for the immune response. So you got to get that straight in your mind. So I don't have a calcium issue, but I want vitamin D for my immune system. Well, I might have a calcium issue pretty soon, but it's going to be too much, not too little. So they abandon all of those, and those are the molecules that Big Pharma has circled back around and is synthesizing, because the danger with 125D and trying to treat cancer and things like that is hypercalcemia. People get in trouble with calcium. So they make synthetic molecules that don't affect calcium, that are similar to 125D. And all that means is they altered the backbone of the molecule somewhere else. If you change the molecule in a certain spot, it'll always influence calcium. If you change it in other places, it might not. So they went back and found all those inert molecules that didn't influence calcium and found out they're wonderful things. And so now you run the risk of, maybe you don't realize it. Maybe that is your special a drug you're on. Let's say you're on an antifungal. Maybe that drug is now displacing the natural vitamin D molecule, and it might be better at it. It's in pole position on race day. So now you go out in the sun, you make the real molecule, but they've got you on this antifungal that's going to displace the real molecule when you finally make it, maybe steal its enzyme so that it doesn't get used. So Big Pharma is very busy capturing most of our bodily systems.
And I think they're busy capturing our bodily systems and lying about what's the cause and the correlation, so that we're in a state of fear. Because, I think, number one, people are in a state of fear about the sunshine. We've been taught to stay out of the sun. And if you're in the sun, slather on sunscreen. I'm not convinced that even the benign ones that are just zinc oxide, I'm not convinced that zinc isn't harming the body as well. But I think, we absolutely need the sun. We're wearing sunglasses now. I stopped wearing sunglasses out in the when I go outside, and my eyesight is back to normal. I'm 54 years old. My eyesight's 20/20, and I don't need reading glasses, but I was starting to. So I started to just get off I don't wear sunscreen. I don't wear sunglasses anymore. And it was the sunglass that I think is inhibiting something. So it's either a receptor in the eye that's telling you how much sun you need, or regulating it, or, I don't think we ever really know how the human body operates.
No, probably not, because there's not enough money now to study it in an honest sense without you want to drive it to your own conclusion to justify something you're doing. But I want to say this real quick. We talk about these pathways and how we expect D3 to become 25D, it to progress to 125D. We think about these molecules in the way we've read about them. But the more that I read about the body, the more I realize that label that I give to those molecules, promiscuous, I realize there's a reason for that. If you were going to design an engine, let's say, you would want to design an engine that could use a plethora of different oils. You don't want to be stuck with this one type of oil. You want them to use a variety of fuels. You don't want to be locked into one fuel. So a lot of times there's another molecule that can do the same job, can maybe use their same receptor, can maybe replace it, can maybe even become it, because the body is really smart. And during all of our history, we had to get by with whatever we could find. And so it isn't quite as simple as we think. The body has other ways of doing things. I recently found out where 125D can back up to the 25D level. It has to go into the epimerization pathway, but then from there, it can make a lot of other choices. It can go right back to the 125D. It can go back to an epi form of 125D. So the body's going to decide what it wants. So you need to keep that in mind. We aren't necessarily as locked in these pathways as we've been convinced that we are.
That's so interesting.
Otherwise, the big pharma drugs wouldn't work. They wouldn't be able to step in. That's a whole new thing in the game.
And when I say these drugs work, I don't think they're doing anything but changing their pharmaceutical funded lab values into their pharmaceutical funded ranges, into their pharmaceutical normal range. Because what I see as now doing hospice is that the people that are living the longest, the healthiest, in the most normal weight ranges take 0 prescriptions and 0 over the counter and 0 supplements.
Right.
None. So I think the takeaways, that's what I wanted to get to now, kind of transition into the takeaways. But before I do that, if you have time for one more question, pregnant women are told to take vitamin D3, and you're told to supplement your newborn infant and all the way up as they're growing. And I know when you're growing, your bone health is completely different. Do you have anything to say about the risks for pregnant women, infants, children taking even small doses, regular doses of vitamin D3, or God forbid mega doses?
Well, the problem with them taking vitamin D during pregnancy is that they have a spike in the 125D because they're pregnant to begin with. So they'll have 40% more 125D to begin with. And so that's a problem right there. They aren't deficient. They are if you only look at their 25D and you agree with the new goal. If you didn't agree with the new goal, neither number is deficient. But they have a lot of 125D. But during the pregnancy, that you could spend the next decade reading the literature about pregnancy. You've got the placenta go between. You've got all these other molecules that I would be considering, when I look at it, like the epiforms and stuff like that. There's other molecules that are involved in the womb with bone building, like endocannabinoids, things like that. So it's not as simple as they say. But we do know from some recent studies that even 400 IU can result in bone loss. It doesn't take very much. So it's not a good deal. And with the children, I sent you a bunch of papers about the hormone imprinting, because it's not natural for the baby to be exposed, the fetus to be exposed to those kind of levels of vitamin D. That's historically, it never happened. But now we've decided with our new goal, everybody needs to stop and remember, this is a man-set goal based upon associations only with 25D. And it can never be more than associations, because 25D isn't biologically active. It doesn't do anything. It can never be proof, real proof. Proof comes from the molecule that does the work, 125D.
Wow. Yeah. And I that's why I'm so intent on spreading the word about this, because I do think, especially now, we're just bombarded with misinformation, toxins, poisons all over the place. And so we as moms are almost, trying not to stay in fear, but it's like, what can we have in our toolkit to help our kids? And the last thing you want to do is make it worse. The last thing you want to do is add insult to injury. And so I want to get into kind of like what's a good elevator speech for talking to friends, practitioners, new moms about the truth about what vitamin D3 is, the truth about, are we ever deficient, and where the research actually lies. And for me, what I just kind of go back to is, I have one rule you don't interfere with God, or you don't interfere with Mother Nature, whatever word you want to put in there, because we don't understand it. And I have seen in my 54 years, when we do interfere, it has disastrous results every single time, because we're meddling in something we're not sure about. And then you add in dollar signs, and now we're meddling in ways that create revenue and downstream customers.
Well, I think really, and Morley talked about this in a podcast I did with him, the farcical goal. We have to really think about how the goal now is really a farce. It's disconnected from reality, because if you look, we were looking at a grassroots health chart, and it had a bell curve of the U.S. population of 25D. And the bell curve peaked at around 2021. And so that was the goal that the IOM wanted to set. They wanted to set the goal at 20. And they were compromising at that. They really wanted the goal to be at 12.5, because they said only 6% of the population in the US was below 12.5. And that was the goal they wanted. But the Institutes of Medicine, they got it elevated to 30, 40, 50. And so that became the new goal. But that's disconnected from reality in two ways. What's the bell curve show? What's the general population at? And then look at the all-cause mortality curves. Where is the highest survival, or the lowest mortality? It's between 20 and 24. It happens to be right where most people's body is keeping their vitamin D, in that bell curve. So that's a realistic goal. Scientifically, we know mortality rises when you're above that and below that. And the lowest all-cause mortality is in that sweet spot from 20 to 24. There's some other papers that show 21. There's no benefit in being above 21. So then when you see a bell curve of the US population, you realize, hey, the body is in sync with that knowledge, those facts. But disconnected, we have these people that are using correlation equals causation, looking at the levels of the well people and making that the goal for the sick. This is a disconnect. It's not real. It's a farcical goal for sick people.
That was exactly my conclusion. So if I could sum this up and correct me on any part of this, what they're testing for when they do your regular lab values, and most labs they're testing for 2,5-D, which is not a marker for anything. It's not a marker for bone health. It's not a marker for reduction in disease. It's simply a level that you are at. If you are low, it's not really saying anything either. It's the 1,2,5-D that is more a marker of, if it is deficient, then you have something seriously wrong with your body. It's not, and it doesn't need to be rectified with taking a supplement of vitamin D3, which is cholecalciferol. And anyone that takes cholecalciferol is taking a rodenticide. And the rodenticide will, whether it has immediate benefits or detractors, it will cause downstream harm.
Right.
It could cause a bloom of feeling good because it's a steroid, and some people have benefit from taking a steroid in their initial feelings.
Right.
Not necessarily that it's actually benefiting anything. You're just getting almost like a shot of adrenaline. Ooh, I'm awake, but you haven't resolved any of the problems. And then when we're talking about taking this cholecalciferol for people that are pregnant, for people that have young children and infants and developing bones, it could actually be even more harmful and create, and I will include the links to those articles you sent me, even more harm, illness, allergies, asthma from taking this steroid.
Right.
Okay. The long and the short of it is, it's a scam. from the pharmaceutical industry, and it's a big money maker for those selling it, making it, prescribing it.
Right. And, rickets back in the 30s began as a real issue. Nobody wants to have rickets. But when you start to really look at what went on in, say, the early 30s, and you find out that 80% of the children in Chicago had rickets, you can't have an explosion of a genetic defect. And so what really happened there, the families were all broke. There's all kinds of factories set up. Small stature children could do things that adults couldn't. The family was happy to have the money. And then factor in no child labor laws, no compulsory education. The kids were indoors and they were lacking sun. And what I really like to drive home is that we did not get rid of rickets by giving people vitamin D. We irradiated the cow's milk, and the cow's feed. And rickets was gone before we started adding vitamin D to stuff. At that point, entered crony capitalism, people making like Fleshman's yeast, making the yeast to go into the beer, Sunshine beer. From that point on, nobody really wanted to point out that, hey, they just needed to go in the sun. We need fortification from that date forward, because that leads to making the supplements, the testing, the going to the doctor to find out what your vitamin D is. The scare of rickets is there, but rickets isn't there anymore. If you look at that bell curve, half of the people should have rickets in that bell curve.
Right. Or half of the people should have some kind of deficiency if these kids aren't going outside. Or half the kids should have had rickets that, during COVID lockdowns. I know a lot of kids personally that weren't allowed to leave their house. So they didn't see the sunshine for about a year. Then we should have seen an upsurge of rickets.
Right. Yeah.
Just really quick on the rickets thing too. We have a way of labeling things or diagnosing things a certain name, rickets. Here's the symptomatology, but then they wipe it out by just not diagnosing people with rickets anymore. They just change it to something else, like polio.
Exactly. Meningitis became, exactly. And then with the polio, you have to really keep that in its lane. So I'm not polio, I'm sorry, with rickets. So rickets was a real deal. 80% of the kids in Chicago had it. All we had to do was irradiate, so use sunshine, basically. We're able to fix that without creating a pill. Let the cows get some sunshine, let the milk get some conversion there, let the food get some conversion there. That went away, did it not? Look, rickets went away. That's the one thing that the lack of the sunshine molecule fixed. All those other things they're blaming, do they go away when you take vitamin D? Did the cancer go away? Did the diabetes go away? No, none of those other things were fixed. One lemon cured scurvy. The sunlight cured the rickets. These pills aren't curing anything they're saying low 25D is causing.
Right. And rickets is caused because you're not going in the sunshine. You're involved in a disease-ridden lifestyle. And when you don't go outside in the sunshine, what were the conditions of the factories that these kids were working in? What were the chemicals they were being exposed to? So it's not, it's never this reductionist standpoint of, well, you didn't get enough sunshine, so now you have rickets. It's you had rickets absolutely because you weren't getting sun, and a host of other factors were contributing to that disease state. Again, this is the exact same thing the pharmaceutical industry has done with all of it. With polio, they were spraying people with DDT, then they were getting these symptoms. Sometimes we can call it polio, or you could call it multiple sclerosis, or what's that one, Guillain-Barre, now that everyone's suffering from. We just label it different things based on what we want to sway the public opinion of.
Right.
So it's like, well, we eradicated polio. No, you're just not diagnosing it as polio anymore, and you're not spraying DDT on children and adults and everything else. So, is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't covered, or I've gotten a little bit misconstrued?
No, I think you got it all right. I don't think we missed anything there. Yeah, it's a complex topic, and you have to think about what you don't see and what you do see, and what pans out to meaning anything. Like I said, rickets was easily curable. All it took was some sunshine.
Yeah.
But vitamin D pills clearly are not getting rid of cancer. It's not
They're
working.
not, yeah. And I think too, you can't poison the body back to health. There's a reason you have cancer. It's not something that you caught, going to the gym and working out and meditating. It's a multifaceted road, a lot of roots that have led to that disease state, but we're so indoctrinated into thinking, you know, my bad luck, my bad genes, whatever it is, it has nothing to do with me, but there is a pill and we just got to follow the science, follow the science. But unfortunately, the science is now corrupted, or I don't know that it ever was clean, because the second you get, man involved and money and power and greed, then I don't go to the car salesman to tell me about the car.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we got to do our own research, but that again, it's complicated because you have to kind of know what you're looking for. I used to be able to send my patients to websites that would show you why cholesterol medications were more damaging than supposedly having high cholesterol. And then all of a sudden, 10, maybe 15 years ago, they were gone.
Yeah.
Just gone.
That stuff disappears, right? You're right. And even the archives and stuff aren't finding some of the stuff anymore. That's one thing I've really noticed. It's really hard to find the truth you had before. They've kind of wiped that out, and you can't trust the new truth. That's for sure. And as you said, you've got these alternative health people that buy into the vitamin D thing, but you need this spin on it. If only, you took it with vitamin K. So they're more woke. Yes, the vitamin D is an issue, but you're not going to get that rectified without the magnesium or the K. But let's stop and think about what mainstream does. They'll intervene with you with vitamin D. Vitamin D. It's not a vitamin. They don't care about vitamins. It's one molecule we make. And that's so ironic. It's a molecule we make, and they'll step in. Outside of that, you'll see them do the same kind of thing with B12. They don't really care about the B vitamins, but because they can do a lab and give you a synthetic B12 shot in intervention, they care about that vitamin. So
and it changes the lab value. They've got to have that third piece. So it's those three things right together. It has to be fear factor, deficiency. You don't have enough vitamin B or D or whatever it is, cholesterol, it's too high. I'm afraid. Causes disease. Here's all the disease that will cause if you don't do this: stroke, heart attack, cancer. And then you have to have the normal range. Healthy people are in this range. And then you got to have that intervention that will get the sick into the healthy range. That's pretty simple when you think about it.
From that point. And with B12, the interesting thing about that is that they don't care that you have depleted 2 years worth of storage of B12 from the liver. They're not going to find out how or why that occurred, because they're going to keep you in their lab range with their shot on a routine basis. So it's not going to lead you to better health. You didn't find out where your B12 went. You should have a couple years worth of storage, even though it's water soluble. Nobody's going to look for that because we've got the fix. We'll keep you in a normal. I like the way you said that. They're going to keep you in a normal lab range, and that's really the only goal. It doesn't matter if you get better or not, as long as you get in that range.
Here's my piece of paper that says now you're better. It doesn't matter that your hair is falling out and you can't get out of bed and you're breaking your leg by walking down the stairs. You're fine, because my piece of paper right here says so. And, just the last point is that I think that's how these functional medicine doctors and these naturopaths and homeopaths have been so easily corrupted, is by just some words on paper that done in a certain way during, here's my methods section. Oh, that looks great. But it doesn't say anything about what we're talking about. You can kind of make up anything about anything.
Right. And
because the human body is so miraculous. It's like, well, I can find the 2,5-D, I can find the 1,2,5-D, manipulate that a little bit, and then here we go. Now we're off to the races with another, scamdemic.
Scamdemic, yeah.
Well, Jim Stephenson Jr., I am so appreciative of your time, and the phone call that we had before was so wonderful, just to find somebody that has the drive to do what's right and talk about what's honest, because I'm sure you're not making a lot of money, telling us the truth, and you're spending a lot of time and a lot of research. Thankfully, the family member, I feel sorry for them that they got osteoporosis at 51 and were prescribed a insult to injury, but that sacrifice is benefiting all of us, because of your research. I am now able to take it to doctors and have them. I now ask questions. I kind of go in and like, tell me where this research is wrong, because I'm confused. And they're like, oh, okay, let me, I'll correct that for you, little girl, and we'll tell you why it's great. And I've had a few people that have said, oh dear, what are we doing? So it is waking people up. It is slow, but you're right. It is like a religion.
Yeah, absolutely.
But thank you for your time. It's almost like a basketball player being able to interview Michael Jordan. For me to be able to talk to you today, all the times I've seen your name, all the research that I've done. For people, where can they find you if they want to know more about vitamin D and its risks and all of that?
So I have the Seikosteroid Hormone D page on Facebook. I also have a Substack under my name, Jim Stephenson Jr. also, where I've written some papers and post some stuff. I'm not super active on there. I plan on getting more active on there, but I've written some really good focused papers on there. So if people want to join and check that out. I'm working on one I want to finish on rickets. It's a really tough one to write. Rickets is fascinating when you start reading about it. It blew their mind that you get nutrition from the sun. It really took them a long time to figure it out, what was really going on.
Yeah, I think that's going to be exciting to see what you find out about that, because there is a lot to photosynthesizing with the sun and getting energy from the sunlight. And I think, anything we do to block that is having disastrous results. And even like sunglasses now, I'm reading about how that's blocking, really good receptors to tell you when to get out of the sun, how much sun you need, how to utilize it. Maybe it's telling all those different channels, convert back to 1,2,5-D or keep this enzyme there, whatever it is.
Right.
It's, don't interfere with the Ferrari unless you've read the manual.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think we're going to get to read the manual. I think it's encoded in your DNA. It's got its own instruction set, and it's going to do the right thing unless you roadblock it.
That's it. That, in a nutshell, do not roadblock your body. And I think for me, and recommending anything, I don't recommend people take anything. Get it from the food, get it from the water, sunshine, healthy lifestyle. And then if something is still wrong, then, become medical detectives and find out what was contributing to that and see if we can address that first before putting anything in your mouth or injecting or inhaling.
Agreed. Totally agreed.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jim Stephenson Jr. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Thank you for being on this planet. And maybe I'll have links to, of course, everything we talked about, but I definitely want to pick your brain after you do the rickets research.
Okay, yeah, and we could do another podcast anytime you want.
I would love that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome.